the last part of world-class customer interaction, and I'm very much looking forward to our next talk by Anne from Axel Springer about the Aravoices project, which is about exclusive synthetic voices. We just had a nice talk over lunch, and I think it's going to be very interesting to hear what is the special importance of this voices for the media industry, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So, yeah, I'm very excited to introduce our project Aravoices to you today. But before we jump in, let's kind of take a step back and talk about synthetic media. Because the most well-known and famous form of synthetic media are deepfakes, and they are obviously also pretty infamous. So there has been a lot of discussion about the dangers of synthetic media, and rightly so, because of these unauthorized deepfakes. But synthetic media also opens up many opportunities for publishers. For example, there has been recently a commercial integrating the face of a young Bruce Willis. So these types of deepfakes or synthetic media forms can actually really be a chance to broaden the content. Another form of synthetic media, which we're going to focus on today, is speech synthesis. And due to the development over the recent years, speech synthesis has become much more natural and human-like. So that opens up a huge opportunity for publishers, because we can actually use our existing text content and offer more audio content to our users. And there are many good voices out there, and we also produced a neural voice, and I wanted to show you, to start out with a sample. Apologies to the non-German speakers.
Richterin genehmigt Millioneneinigung im Wasserskandal von Flint. Im Wasserskandal der Stadt Flint im US-Staat Michigan werden die Klagen von Einwohnern gegen eine Zahlung von $625 Millionen beigelegt. Eine Richterin stimmte der Einigung am Mittwoch zu, mit der die Menschen für die Folgen des bleiverseuchten Trinkwassers entschädigt werden sollen, das in den Jahren 2014 und 2015 aus ihren Wasserhähnen kam.
You can already hear there is prosody. It doesn't sound as computer-like as it used to. And yeah, we can actually, it's pleasant enough that we can now synthesize longer articles that are 10 to 12 minutes long. And we see that the streams are also listened to until the end. About 50% of our users listen to the whole audio, even if it's 10 minutes long. When I talk to different voice actors or speakers, they're all worried about that we are gonna subsidize the new synthetic formats with existing formats. We are not replacing them, however. We are seeing it more as a complementary approach, so that we can add more different formats, synthetic voice formats, to our existing formats, such as podcasts. And the reason why is that we actually have different forms of use cases. And according to the use case, we choose the format. So for example, if our use case is characterized by time sensitivity, so that we have to move very fast, or we have a lot of text available, or also maybe we want to personalize our audio content, such as audio newsletters, where we want to directly address a certain individual, then obviously the synthetic formats make more sense. On the other hand, if we have discussions or more unstructured interviews, we stick to recorded audio. But both approaches can be seen as a form of content generation, right? And content generation is at the heart of any media company or publisher. So that's why we decided to develop a text-to-speech service ourselves, which is called Aravoices. And with that text-to-speech service, we can convert and utilize our existing text into audio. And because we only focus on brand-specific voices, meaning that a certain voice is only used exclusively by one brand, we can also optimize our models for that text structure and at the same time create brand awareness across distribution channels. Because the voice is only one part of the service and we want to scale audio production, we also developed a fully integrated synthesis pipeline, which I'm going to talk about later. I wanted to come back for a second why we choose to focus on brand voices and not just use a generic voice that's out in the market, right? It's because we see that our current users consume audio mainly on platforms and aggregators. And there are different forms of branding here. So you can use sound logos, but you can also obviously use sound beds. But we believe that especially the voice is a very, very powerful tool in branding our content. So now we talked about the reasons why, but let's get into it. So how do we actually go about producing a brand voice? So we start by working very closely with a respective brand that wants to produce a brand voice, such as Welt, for example, the brand we started with. And then we define a specific use case, let's say audio articles for politics and economics or even more channels, but maybe not sports, because that's very different. And then we go about defining a voice persona. This has been tackled especially yesterday in some talks. And we also sit down with the editors and kind of ask ourselves, if our brand was a person, how would that brand sound like? And the obvious aspects are age and gender, but then we also want to define more on a characteristics basis, right? So what characteristics does that voice have? So for example, it's relaxed but it's not boring, or it's vibrant but also not loud. So these are more very subjective feelings that we try to quantify together with our linguists. And then we go out with that briefing, we go out into the market and search for the perfect voice and do speaker sourcing. Once we have a short list of those speakers, we then let the users decide. So we always do surveys where we display certain speaker samples, and then the user can vote on their preferred voice. And once the speaker is selected, our training data is selected, then we can actually go into the third step of our production process and get to the studio. And this is usually the most important and exciting part, because it's a very iterative process that we do together with the editors, and there we really do the fine-tuning of how we want the prosody and the tonality to be like. And once we have recorded the training set, we can cut it into small snippets, annotate it, and then train our model. And what comes out of that, you heard at the beginning. So we have our voice now, but we want to start synthesizing, right? We want to produce audio. And how do we do that? For that, we built an automated pipeline. And it starts actually even before that, when the editor publishes their articles in their CMS. We are connected to that CMS, we import the text, and then as a next step, we have an enrichment. And the enrichment, for example, deletes any text elements that should not be synthesized. For Welt, we don't synthesize teaser text, for example. And we also have certain NLP services, which I will touch up on later, because the German language, and we heard it before, loves to merge a lot of words into one. So there is the necessity here for certain services to make the pronunciation even better. And once that is all done, we can finally do the synthesis. And after the synthesis, the article is displayed in our dashboard. For us, it was extremely important to be super transparent, not just internally, but also to our brands. And so anyone who's working on this project has access to this dashboard and can actually see in the highlighted parts down there, can actually see what has been automatically replaced within the text, what has been altered. And you also have a chance to do manual correction if needed, so you can listen to the article, and if, for example, a politician name is mispronounced, you can just right-click, add it to our dictionary, and improve it with phonemes, or you can say, hey, I want to have it pronounced in English. And our dictionary acts as a replacement library, so next time the name comes up, it's pronounced correctly. Yes, and then the article can be published. And we we have a podcast logic, so you can also push an article to multiple podcasts, and here are two formats that you can see on Welt. So one is the read aloud function here, where the player is embedded in the text, and then on the right we have the politic playlist. And as I said, we are organized in podcasts, so you can also use that audio feed and just distribute it to Spotify or wherever you want to make your content accessible. I mentioned it before, the enrichment process is quite important, and it was also a learning journey for us, because especially in German, we have compounded words, and as I mentioned before, we split those up before we start the synthesis. And then the second major source of errors we encountered are English words. And not just straightforward English words, but also, for example, words that are the same in German and English, but pronounced differently depending on context, such as band or band. Written the same, but pronounced very differently, right? So we developed an English word detector who automatically, depending on the context, marks the English words and sets a SSML tag, so it's pronounced English. And last but not least, I already mentioned it, our bucket dictionary, where we can always do manual improvements. And what's also important to note here, this dictionary is not brand specific, but it applies to any brand that we produce voices for. Yeah, so we have the voice, we have the automated pipeline, so what's next, right? So on our AI agenda, we heard it, we talked about it a little before as well, is emotion. So there's obviously also emotional AI, where you analyze the emotions of a voice. We want to do the opposite. We want to invoke emotion in our listeners, hence we want to infuse emotions into our audios. And I brought two examples that came out of our research based on a research data set. And the one is just normal, very expressive.
A subspace is a space that is wholly contained in another space.
And now the exact same voice in sad. For example, if your favorite soccer club lost.
A subspace is a space that is wholly contained in another space.
This is already in the market. Many companies are doing this. We are looking at it more from a content perspective, like what emotion would be relevant to us. And especially soccer news really lends itself, because if you think about like a soccer commentator, it's extremely emotional. It gets very exciting. It's very up and down, right? So we are currently doing research into that space because we want to use the same voice, but we want to make it more relevant for certain types of contents. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, join me at the roundtable.